I thought leaving would hurt less. That was the sentence I kept turning over in my head as the wind cut across Ridge Point and the city stretched out below like someone's messy set of Christmas lights. I sat on the low stone wall where teenagers carved initials and old men fed pigeons, let my hands find the cracks in the concrete, and pretended my life could be reduced to a few steady breaths. There was the rent notice shoved into the drawer like bad fruit, the custody papers with their neat stamped dates, the nights at the warehouse under fluorescent lights that left my back raw and my wallet thinner than my patience. Maya's drawings were on the fridge at home, a parade of stick figures, with big smiles and lots of suns. I'd taped one to the dash of my car so I could see it when traffic made my hands go numb with anger. Sometimes I thought walking away would be cleaner. No more promises I couldn't keep. No more late-night apologies through the doorway while she slept with her thumb in her mouth. No more court dates where my name was printed under someone else's opinion. The idea of leaving sat in me like a dull toothache, painful, but predictable. If I went, I would spare myself the slow leak of failure. I would stop being an endangered species of parent, hunted by bills and missteps. I would stop watching Maya's face when I showed up 5 minutes late and pretending everything was okay. Then I heard the crack. It started small. A sound like old wood giving up a long-held secret. The wind made it easy to miss. The next thing was the woman's breath, sharp and surprised, a sound that made the word scream exist. I didn't plan on stepping over the rail. I didn't plan on hands finding hers, on knees scraping stone, on a way panic turns you small and strong at the same time. 1 second, she was a shadow, teetering on the rotten railing. The next, she was dangling in front of the void, and I was reaching for her, my fingers finding sleeve and coat, and whatever the universe offered. I'm not going to tell you in detail how I pulled her back. It wasn't a movie move. It was clumsy, honest, gravity me, feeling every pound and second, and my hands burning with the strain of not letting go. There was the rotten board under her feet, a flurry of gravel, the taste of metal air in my mouth. I remember the cold seeping through my jacket and how the city lights blurred into a smear of indifferent stars while the two of us hung above them. When we were finally on the same side of the railing, both of us breathing hard, I expected the woman to be furious, to call me a reckless stranger, to demand to be left alone at the edge. Instead, she wiped her palms on her coat, looked at me with a face that had somehow calm in it, and said my name. "Mr. Briggs," she said, and it was the calmest thing I'd heard in months. A badge was clipped to her coat, where the lower edge of her scarf had brushed away shiny. Official, the kind of rectangle that makes words, legal, and people less complicated. At first, I thought I was still dizzy from the height, because the name on the badge matched the name I'd been seeing on the courthouse docket for weeks. Judge Cassandra Vance? The world narrowed to her badge in my hands, and the way I felt suddenly as exposed as a page torn from a file. I'd been afraid all along that my life would be reduced to a hand-stamped line. Inadequate housing, erratic employment, history of missed check-ins. Those phrases felt like a slow eraser on everything I loved about being Maya's dad. There was a private fury that rose up in me, then past the adrenaline, past the shock of almost letting someone fall to their death. "You're the judge on my case," I said, and the sentence sounded stupid even to me. She blinked, a small human motion that wasn't in any pamphlet on ethics. "I am," she said, "and you nearly knocked me off a cliff." We laughed then, the kind of brittle thing two tired people make when something obscene has happened. Then the laughter spent itself and left us on the stone bench like two deflated balloons. "What are you doing here?" she asked. It was a fair question. I had no good answer beyond the one I'd been rehearsing for myself. I needed air. I needed a place where the wind could take the noise away for a minute. I'd come thinking about leaving in a quiet, watchful sort of way. I hadn't intended to save, or be saved. She told me she came up to think, too. That surprised me. Judges, in my imagination, were statues. People who lived behind cedar-paneled doors and made decisions from thick files. The idea of a judge sitting on the same cracked stone as me, letting the wind tumble her hair and her papers into a mess, broke something open. "You know," she said, "there's a danger in deciding lies from paper." Her voice was plain, not confessional, just simple. "A file can't tell you how someone tucks a child into bed." It hit me like a strike to the sternum. That was what I'd been terrified of. The reduction of our life into black ink. and typed sentences. "I'm not a file," I said, before I could stop myself. "Maya's entire world is in the way I make her pancakes, or the stories we tell before she sleeps. If you'd seen that, you'd seen me show up. You wouldn't be looking at a piece of paper." She didn't argue. Instead, she watched me like someone taking notes without a pen. It was unnerving. There was no promise there, no blink of favoritism, just a glance that somehow made me feel less like an object to be judged and more like a person who could be noticed. Then my phone buzzed, one of those little lives I kept folded in my pocket. I didn't want to check it on the cliff with a judge I'd just rescued, but the vibration was sharp. I thumbed it. There was a voicemail from Aunt Lena. "Call me. Now. Maya's at the center. The rest was a jumble. The air dropped out of me, like someone had opened a trapdoor. I said the word center and it felt like a boulder rolling across my chest. The woman Judge Vance looked at me, and for a moment, the professional distance rearranged itself into something simple and human. She clipped a note to her file and stood. "I can ride with you," she offered. She said it with the same plainness as everything else. No attachment, no tiny favors, only the bare offer of a seat in the car. I told myself no. I told myself a lot of things as I started down the path to the parking lot. Worst case scenarios. Images of Maya on the floor of the community center, the words custody and court becoming thunderheads. But she followed. She kept a steady space beside me on the drive, like being watched by someone who owed no one anything and still looked with curiosity. The community center smelled of disinfectant and crayons. There was a knot of parents and staff, voices that rose and fell in the pattern of worry. I pushed through and found Maya curled in a chair, knees drawn up like a secret. Her hair was in a mess of elastic and freckles. She was rocking slowly, hands clenched on a stuffed rabbit whose ear was more love than fabric. Her cheeks were pink with crying, and she pressed the rabbit to her mouth like a charm. From across the room, she looked small, the size of a single breath that could be swallowed by a roomful of adults. I knelt without thinking, and she leaned into me like something that had been waiting for me to return. Her hands smelled like glue and eggs. There was the faint taste of syrup on her lower lip from the breakfast she'd insisted on making that morning because she had declared herself the chef. The details, the little scraps of living reminded me why I hadn't left. Everything else was messy, but she was not. "You okay?" I asked. My voice was rough and needed to be softer than it was. She nodded, but the nod was tiny, a boat trying to ride out a wave. Staff members were circling with clipped sentences, practical and efficient. The center director spoke in the stilted language of the institution, a litany of forms and incident reports. I felt the old fear curl up, the fear of being turned into a column of ink on an official page, a bullet point that said panic, neglect, unstable environment. That's when Judge Vance stepped forward. She didn't speak for me. She did something quieter. She knelt and talked to Maya at her level, like the woman who'd been plucked from the cliff was suddenly competent in the language of a frightened child. She asked Maya about her rabbit, noticed the drawing stuck to the chair in a shaky crayon sun, and listened. It seemed like nothing, and yet the act of someone with that kind of paper behind them listening metaphorically to my daughter felt like a kind of recognition I hadn't known I needed. I hated myself a little for noting how calm she was. I hated myself more for noticing that, seeing my daughter with someone who had the power to change everything soft, something inside me I'd been holding hard against. There wasn't a promise in anything she said. There was no leaning into my need. There was only presence, which somehow mattered more than an argument could. If this resonates with you, stick around and subscribe for more stories like this. I remember hearing in my head, like some ghostly narrator, suggesting I shouldn't be reading the scene, but no, this is life. If you're listening, you know the weight of someone seeing your tired kid and not making it into a headline. You know how strange it is to have a person who could reduce your life to a file, look at it and see texture. That's when the story shifted for me. It stopped being about leaving and started being about the labor of staying. There was a voicemail later that night from the center explaining they'd given Maya some space, that the paramedics had checked her and she was fine. They used those clinical words, stable, but none of that captured the way her shoulders relaxed when I picked her up and she buried her face into my neck. The sentence incident report would be another piece of paper in someone's file. The way the judge sat quietly in the corner while I smoothed hair and told stupid jokes to get a laugh was another kind of evidence. It was the steady, contradictory thing presence that made the difference. Court was a different animal. The courthouse smelled of lemon cleaner and old books. The sound of shoes on tile carried like a small drumbeat. I sat on a bench, palms sweaty, the papers in my folder creased from being read too many times. The room held a dozen people who were strangers to my life and also the ones whose decisions would bend it in one direction or another. There are rules in courtrooms, rhythms that make you feel like an instrument being tuned. When my name was called, I stood and felt my knees as if they were new. The questions were polite, then blunt, then carefully measured. Did I have a stable place for Maya, who watched her when I was at work? How often did I miss calls? The words were designed to be neutral. I tried to keep my answers honest. I didn't polish the edges to look better than I was. I told them about the nights I stood in the pantry eating cereal while Maya slept because I couldn't afford to spoil her with the smell of worry. I said, quietly and simply, that I loved her and that the way I loved her was by being there however flawed that presence could be. There was a woman from the community center who spoke for us. She didn't plead for me. She described in small details, I show up for story time. He calls if he's going to be late. He stays when things are hard. Those sentences are hardly heroic, but there was weight to a witness who had seen the small, repetitive acts that people in suits often overlook. Judge Vance listened. She asked a few pointed questions. You could see her weighing the ledger of life against the simple, stubborn evidence of a father's presence. There's a danger in writing what happened in the private space of the deliberation room. How much can any one brief encounter change a case? So I'll stick to what I know. When she spoke, her voice had the same plainness it did on the cliff and in the community center. She didn't twine sentiment with law. She didn't promise mercy as if it were a favor. She spoke about responsibility and about fact patterns. And then, with a steadiness that felt like the beginning of air, she said that the court recognized the efforts I had made, the supports I had engaged, and the child's bond with me. The decision was not a movie ending. It wasn't a clean-cut salvation. There were conditions, the kind of practical things that try to balance care and safety, continuing services, a structured plan that was meant to make real the word stability. The ruling kept Maya primarily in my care. There was relief so sudden it almost felt guilty, like I'd been given something by chance. But it was not chance. It was the cumulative result of showing up to little things and to big moments, of a woman who held an official badge, noticing a child who needed a sofa tether, and of the community center files that said, simply, he came. I walked out of the courtroom that day with paper copies of the decision folded in my hand. People who aren't in this business think custody rulings are absolute, like a verdict from a god. They're not. They are practical, sometimes messy instruments trying to make life livable. They don't erase the late nights or the bank balances that hiss at the edges of existence. They do, however, give you a platform to try again with a little less fear. For me, it meant a stadinga chance to demonstrate that my failures were not the whole of who I was. Months passed with the slow, patient change of seasons. The railing at Ridgepoint was replaced on a gray morning when I walked up there with Maya on my shoulders. She was a little heavier, full of new words and a different kind of confidence. She pointed at the spot where we had sat the night I almost left, then at the new wooden railing, and declared it safe. The worker who'd replaced the boards said he fixed them after hearing about the loose planks. He didn't know that those boards had been the hinge of a different kind of decision entirely. The small repairs in life rent caught up, bit by bit. A night shift schedule rearranged so I could do a bedtime more often didn't make everything easier at once. Poverty has an aftertaste that lingers. But there were tiny, concrete things. A new school backpack because my mother-in-law found a sale. Aunt Lena agreeing to help when my shifts crossed. The community center offering an art program that ate up an hour each week and gave Maya a stack of new drawings. One of those drawings drew stick figures under a massive sun. A little scribble labeled Daddy and another labeled Maya lives now on my fridge. Sometimes when I open that door, my hands find that paper first, and the memory of courtrooms and rotten railings and sharp, manageable, panic softens. Judge Vance and I passed each other once in the hallway of the courthouse months later. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange favors. She nodded, the smallest acknowledgement of recognition. I nodded back. She had done her job. I had done mine as best I could. The distance was professional and marked by mutual awareness. She had seen a part of my life I'd feared would be invisible. I had been seen. People have asked me, since friends, new fathers, people who listened to my story, whether the choice to stay was easy afterward. It wasn't. Staying is heavy work. It is not a dramatic moment of bravery, but a succession of small, uncelebrated acts. Answering the phone when the community center calls. Getting up for days you don't want to. Learning how to ask for help before the hole under your feet gets too wide. I still have nights where the idea of walking away flashes across my mind like a tired neon sign, promising oblivion that feels simpler than this complicated, storefront version of courage. But here's what I didn't know before that night on Ridgepoint. The hurt of leaving is different from the hurt of staying. Leaving steals something by taking it out of your hands. Leaving is an erasure. You think you're sparing yourself, and instead you lose the small ordinary things that gift you meaning. Handmade cards taped to microwaves, a child humming herself to sleep, the way someone says your name when they are sleepy and trusting. Staying hurts in ways that are close and intimate. It wears you down and taxes your patience. But staying also allows repair. It allows other people to see you wrecked and human, and occasionally to place a splint over what has cracked. The judge couldn't have promised custody from a single encounter on a cliff. She didn't, and she shouldn't. But she could and did choose to see the things that papers can't contain. The genuine pattern of attendance at a community program. The way a father hums a silly song to coax a child through a meltdown. The way someone shows up even when they've been tired into bone. Those are slow things, accumulative. It's not miraculous. It's not an overnight fix. It's steadying, like the new boards at Ridgepoint that now hold us when the city's wind wants to pry us open. If I'd left that night, if I'd chosen the abstract relief of vanishing, I wouldn't be here to tape the crayon drawings to the refrigerator or to count the new freckles appearing on Maya's nose. I would have been spared 1,000 small cuts, yes, but I would also have been robbed of the occasion to repair and to be repaired. I would have been a man who chose his own breath over another person's, and that choice would have left a different kind of wound, one that doesn't heal with new boards. So when people ask me if I regret my past mistakes, I tell them this. I regret the chances I didn't take to be better when I had the energy, but I don't regret staying. Leaving would have been a kind of cowardice that felt neat and sharp. Staying is a ragged sort of bravery. It makes you show up to the dull, daily things that finally add up into proof. If this story moved you, leave a comment with one small way you showed up for someone this week. Tell me the thing that felt tiny but mattered. And if you want to hear more stories about the messy, stubborn work of staying, subscribe. We'll keep looking at what happens when people choose the hard, honest road. I still think about Ridgepoint sometimes. When the wind hits the new railing, it sings a little differently. It reminds me that the world tests us not always dramatically, but in the slow, imperative ways of life, and that the most dangerous idea is that escape is mercy. I thought leaving would hurt less. What I learned is that staying hurts in ways that are brutal and beautiful, but it also lets you be found. It makes room for someone with a badge to witness your life, not as a verdict, but as a person. It makes room for repair. It makes room for Maya to grow up, knowing that when she was scared, someone had chosen to stay.